Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jane McFarland, Director of the Smart Cities Research Center. Also hosting today is my colleague, Professor Daniel Rodriguez, who is co-leader for the applications of data science and artificial intelligence to equity, race, and inclusion in mobility and transportation. The rapid growth of data science and AI applied to mobility holds great promise. But as with all digital implementations of process, there is also the possibility of unintended consequences that can result from propagating inherent biases. Digital representations of the real world come with their own embedded biases and veracity issues, and they are just now starting to be integrated into transportation system designs. If we use machine learning algorithms trained on biased data, we're operationalizing, amplifying, and legitimizing historical discrimination and opacity. The use of these tools has raised fundamental questions in law, in the social sciences, and in public policy, and we must fully understand them before we embed them into core services. Our aim with this series is to reflect on and raise awareness of applications and opportunities, as well as the potential misuses and consequent impacts of using these techniques in the mobility and transportation space, specifically as it refers to race, equity, and diversity. We want to bring a unique and an innovative perspective to existing discussions around this topic. 2 weeks ago, we heard from Professor Bill Howie from University of Washington. He discussed machine learning models that attempt to build fair, reusable, equitable representations of heterogeneous city data for the purpose of improving performance of mobility prediction tasks. Today, I am privileged to introduce Ramses Maddow. Ramses is the Division Manager of Planning, Policy, and Sustainability for the Department of Transportation in the city of San Jose. He leads a brilliant team of planners, engineers, policy specialists, data, and modeling experts who are planning the San Jose citywide transportation system. Before joining the city of San Jose, he worked for 10 years as the Associate Director of Parking and Transportation Services for Stanford University. His team is working to implement the ambitious mode change and VMT reduction goals of the city's general plan, all the while proactively dealing with the fundamental disruptions that we are seeing in the transportation space. This involves defining and implementing an access and mobility plan, which will be supported by an innovative decision support system. As such, the concerns that we're focusing on in this seminar series are forefront in his mind. Today, Ramses will be giving us a real-world view of the challenges associated with implementing equity in city transportation planning. I'd like to acknowledge the co-sponsorship of this talk, the Center for Information Technology Research in the Interest of Society, the Banatow Institute, and the College of Engineering. Finally, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ramses.
Thank you, Jane, for the great intro and for the great honor of coming to speak to such a great group. I am going to share my screen here, get my presentation. Bernice, can you allow me to share my screen? Yeah, this is such an interesting kind of general topic, right? The inherent bias that can be generated when we start measuring things is always a danger. And in the city government, we're the folks who actually do this. We're the folks who actually control where the resources go, where the decisions get made, who actually gets what out of public money, right? And so what I want to do today is just kind of walk through what our general transportation planning workflow or work plan looks like, and talk about some of the planning efforts where we are struggling with the issues of equity, or wrestling with, I would say, more, and some of the places where we are specifically trying to implement metric systems, or as Jane mentioned, our decision support system for our citywide plan, and how we are trying to address some of the equity considerations that are coming about there. We're nowhere near complete. And what I'm hoping to give you guys is, I'm not going to give you equations. I'm not going to be one of the folks who gives you the, the stochastic model that does this or that. This is going to be about where these kinds of, this kind of algorithmic work that a lot of you probably on this seminar work on, where does this go and how does it get implemented and drive resource decisions and the like. So let me start first with San Jose. So San Jose is at the southern tip of the San Francisco Bay Area. It's the 10th largest city in America with just over 1 million people, and 3rd largest in California. Only San Diego and LA are larger than us. This map here shows the strange, I don't know, kind of squashed turtle design of the city. And the dots here represent certain version of density, right? So we're looking at the non-white and non-affluent density of population. And you can really see, well, it's hard to pick out the exact colors. You can really see you kind of have the East San Jose kind of classic across the tracks kind of scenario here, where you really have issues of representational equity and concentrations of population. And you'll see, of course, the historic inequities that have kind of built upon that. San Jose most certainly is not historically been outside of the many issues of inequity. On the left here is the redlining map that was used a long time ago here in San Jose. And if you haven't read it, the book, The Color of the Law, really lays out how this kind of city planning and redlining really did affect the construction of the city. And again, this continues to be able to be mapped onto the levels of poverty. And here on the right side, you can see our displacement typology. There's a citywide displacement policy being generated right now, where it's really trying to figure out where we're seeing a lot of displacement and how to address that. And it's not so dissimilar. One thing you'll notice is this old map here, and I'll flip back for a second, and this new map are significantly different in size and geographic spread. San Jose went from about 100,000 people in 1950 and encompassed mostly what we think of as downtown Willow Glen and Japantown and some other neighborhoods, and expanded very, very quickly from 1955 until about 1990, just gobbling up all the neighboring communities that were unincorporated, and grew to this gargantuan 180 square miles, and 1 million people. Our demographic, I pulled out some of the demographic analysis we're doing in our emerging mobility and equity plan. And you can really see that we have concentrations of the various layers that people use to measure inequity, right? You have, again, this east side that you saw that in that first map, right? We're really seeing concentrations of the various historical layers that add up to inequity, right? So of course, the middle one is one of the most important ones, is poverty. But these other two are other representations outside of race, which the first map showed, that are really showing where we're seeing the inequity really show up. And I'll note, North San Jose, this kind of white little triangle just above on the right map here. You have the big oval. If you look just up to the left, you have this white triangle. That's North San Jose. And if you go northeast, right, that is Santa Clara County, or Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto, where all the really high income jobs are. And you'll see again that the inequity that's being shown here is further away, is pushed aside to the mountains and not as close to the great job opportunities that are generally kind of in San Jose, North San Jose, then downtown a little bit, where we're seeing some good mixing, and then again up to the peninsula. And a lot of equity in transportation, right? It's all about geography. Transportation is about moving around, and inequity has to do with spatial relationships. And so being able to access the economy and opportunities is a big factor in trying to figure out how to make transportation be a positive part of healing our society's inequitable past. So I want to really frame a lot of what I'm talking about to somewhat simple concepts. One is process equity. As a city, and as anybody who's trying to figure out how to measure something right, we need to ensure that what we're measuring for isn't just something we learned in school and think is great, or have read that this or that, hey, bike lanes, that's got to be the great thing, or transit, or whatever it is in transportation that we're trying to get done. We need to make sure that we're defining what our communities want and how they want it, and what their nuances are around those things as deeply as we can. And that's process equity, right? That's making sure the voices of the community are actually present in defining goals and defining outcomes, and defining where we should be going. And this sometimes gets lost in, particularly in government speak, because we have these kind of defined measurements that say, hey, inequity is measured by race, by language, by this and that. And while I think that there's no arguing that, there is an argument for what the groups actually want and how to help them. And so making sure that we are really incorporating voices and helping us define our problems in the directions we're supposed to take is very important. And then, of course, outcome equity. Jane's great opening really highlights this. Anytime you measure something, especially as a government entity, you are creating power. You are exercising power. And that power can be incredibly impactful, as the redlining of the past really showed, right? So making sure that those outcome equity measurements are reflective of those, the process equity, the voices, and not just kind of census tract statistical pieces, is actually a pretty hard thing to do, and something that a lot of time should be spent on. And the last part I'll bring up, I put this in a cycle, is that outcome equity should continuously listen to process equity, and process equity should be informed by outcome equity, right? So while you're talking with folks in the community, making sure that they have direct access to the measurements that you're trying to use, as sophisticated as they may or may not be, trying to get people to understand this is what we're measuring, this is how, is a really important thing. And that outcome equity actually, it shouldn't be as static as sometimes it comes off as. So some thoughts there, and some of the themes that I'm going to kind of walk through. All right. In San Jose, we have a very large transportation planning work area. I've broken it down into three major pieces here. I'm going to start from the smallest box and go upwards. One of our work planning areas is area plans, right? This is where we go into a neighborhood or a collection of neighborhoods and try to address the community's concerns, and the larger policy goals of the city, and try to bring out what are the actual changes on the ground that need to be brought about to reach those goals. Is it bike lanes here? Is it transit there? Is it better auto access here? How do we connect the trails? Whatever it may be. And right now we have 4 of those going on. One of them actually just got adopted, and we're very excited about the other ones. Of course, downtown transportation plan is a really big one. The next big tranche of work is the options and modal planning and implementation work. This looks at things like emerging mobility. We have a plan going on there, looking at how do we guide and gain from the changes that are coming from the market. Scooters, autonomous systems, autonomous vehicle delivery robots, drones, whatever it is, right? Kind of really understanding how do we make sure those things play well in the urban environment and actually meet equity. And actually, our emerging mobility plan is almost 50% focused on defining and working from an equitable perspective. We're actually kind of using it to chisel out what we think our equity perspective is. Another really big example here, which I'll talk about a bit next, is our bike plan. Our bike plan is it's a huge plan. It looks for, I think it's 550 plus miles of bikeway, 400 of which is proposed to be protected by some physical barrier between the auto traffic and the bicyclists. And this is resource planning, right? This is saying the city is going to build things and give some parts of the city better access through this important mode. To some people and potentially not others. Hopefully over time will be to everybody, and really making sure that when we prioritize these pieces of work, as I'll talk through in a bit, how do we make sure that plays out right? And the last is our kind of building the framework and tools. We have a citywide plan called the Access and Mobility Plan that's taking the big policy goals of the city, which are cutting in half the use of single occupancy vehicles and vehicle miles traveled, and trying to turn those into actual strategies. San Jose is built around the car, except for its historic neighborhoods, and trying to change a city like this is a significant undertaking and really actually quite a difficult problem to solve. And I'll talk a little bit about where we are there. But what's most interesting, and Jane's actually been advising us on helping us build a decision support tool that will help us prioritize which projects we should actually be taking on. We'll talk about that at the end of the talk. All right, so let's dive in. Why isn't that working? There we go. All right. So I'm going to start off with the bike plan. Now, the bike plan was just adopted late last year, and it, in a certain way, cut a lot of the weeds for us on how we do equitable planning. So you can see here the goals of the plan, right? Of course, improve safety. One of the main barriers to people using bikes in San Jose is that, well, people drive really fast, and you're not, a stripe of paint just doesn't protect you from an errant driver, a quick mistake, or somebody looking at their phone. And so really making sure that we're focused on safety. Of course, our mode shift increase, and you can see here are the mode shift increase numbers that we are been given by our city council to do. And this is a huge change. San Jose is about 3 or 4% right now bike share. And we are trying to increase that to 15% by 2040 and 20% by 2020. These are really big goals. And then, of course, lead with equity, which is this moral guidance that we really need to get into this. And what's really interesting, or I really like putting this page up front, is equity as a consideration and as a metric and as a topic always has to play with everything else going on. And that's part of kind of the balancing act that we're all trying to play with this. And so I think it shows that up right away. So what did we do, right? So we had those goals. And to get a bike plan, what you really need is a network across the city that says, here are where these facilities should go. And how do we, and what types of facilities should be put where and the like, right? So what did we do to create the network to do all of this, right? So of course, we already had plans laid out. There's an immense amount of work from all kinds of different things like those area plans we were talking about. The old bike plan, of course, still had some thoughts. We have Vision Zero work, so on and so forth. Then we have our network analysis. And this is kind of the cold hard facts kind of thing, right? Is where do we think there's demand? Where are there safety issues? What are the connectivity pieces that are really important, right? Certain legs connect, dense neighborhoods. Other legs connect horse ranches to trails, and which ones are going to give us the most actual mode change. And then, of course, comfort, which is a kind of soft version of safety. And then there's the community input, right? And really, this is that process equity, right? Is what is it that people actually want to see? What kinds of facilities do people want? And what level of impact are people willing to take, right? Because a bike lane a lot of times is in some conflict with or competing with other uses of the roadway, right? Whether that be parking or even a travel lane, we really need to figure that out. And so we did a lot of outreach on this, and one of the interesting models here in terms of outreach that we've started doing with this plan and now do in all of our plans is that we pay community-based organizations, and a lot of times we pick ones that are not topic specific. So we didn't go to the Bicycle Coalition. We went to the Latinos United for a New America and Veggie Lucian, which is actually a kind of urban gardening group. And we pay them to be part of our team. We pay them to be consultants to how we do our outreach, and we pay them to be bullhorns to the message of the plan and to getting a larger group of folks and a more diverse group of folks to the conversation. And that's been an immensely effective way of doing a few things, right? One is actually bringing those voices to the table, which again, that process equity, you can't actually have good equitable outcomes if you're not actually listening to the people that have been underserved. And inherently, the people who have been underserved don't always know or the ways that government works, are deeply distrustful and sometimes deeply afraid of engaging in public discourse or engaging with government officials. And so breaking that barrier down is key. All right, so we built the network, right? And then we had to prioritize the network, right? And you can see here on the left, I'll show a map in a little bit of the full network, but we had to figure out of the 557 miles that we are proposing here, how do we actually bring priority to this whole crazy set of lines on a map that meet all of our goals? And so these were the three big criteria, right? Mode shift. Actually, which ones will give us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of changing people's or offering people's who bike the opportunity to do so. And one interesting fact I'll throw out there is we learned that roughly 55% of folks in San Jose said they would bike a lot more if it was safer and they could get around, right? And so there's a huge latent demand there that we're trying to meet. And so mode shift seems like a real possibility. Then, of course, safety, right? Which is kind of the supportive mode shift. If we can get people to be more safe out there, then we're likely to do so. And you can see here the red lines are where safety is the biggest, it kind of stands out the most. And this, of course, comes from our Vision Zero work, which looks specifically at crash data and tries to figure out where people are very vulnerable. And then lastly, the topic of the day is increasing equity, right? And this really looks at, and I'll show you how we measured equity in this one in a second, but how do we make sure that the facilities that we're going to propose really make sure they increase this. Okay, so what did we use to really measure equity in this case? For this plan and a lot of plans in the Bay Area, so if you're interested in kind of figuring out what's going on in the Bay Area equity-wise and metrics-wise, you should be looking at MTC's communities of concern. And I think this is I put this slide up partly to kind of show you, here are the metrics that are put in there, right? This is kind of how the region has said, this is what inequity means. But it's also a really interesting example, right? So the communities of concern metric is now included in most grant applications, right? So if you can measure inequity in your community, you're more likely to get money. So this is good, right? It's used for a lot of resource, or starting to be used for a lot of resource allocation work. Again, a good thing, right? We're really trying to embed this measurement in the work that we're doing. And you can see it all over the Bay Area really propping up. And you can see San Jose has in the South Bay, has most of the communities of concern inside of its boundaries. And you really have to get up to East Palo Alto, right around the Dumbarton Bridge there. And then, of course, the East Bay and parts of the peninsula farther up north near San Francisco. There's a lot of measurements in here that make this up. And so this was the measurement we used in the bike plan. And here is the priority network, right? So taking of 557 miles, we boiled it down to 92 miles, taking those three different layers of prioritization and put out this map. And actually, folks in Jane's group are helping us look at the impact of this network on travel characteristics on the roadway, as well as hopefully some deeper look at mode shift. All right, moving on to the downtown transportation plan. The downtown transportation plan covers a very large area, kind of traditional downtown, all the way up to Japantown there in the north, and Willow in the south, just south of 280. It includes some very important pieces. You may have heard of the Downtown West project, which is Google's big project in San Jose. That's kind of all to the west there of the 87 highway, abutting the SAP Center and the Diridon Station. Diridon Station itself is looking to get a multi-billion-dollar upgrade that will bring BART and upgrade Caltrain, high-speed rail, all of these things kind of going. Sorry, are you having audio issues with me?
Yes, Francis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it breaking up?
Yeah, it's more like static, it seems.
It's a static, huh?
That got better, right there. Got better, it seems.
Okay, well, I'll just push it closer to my face. The fan just kicked onto my laptop, so I'm wondering if that's what it is.
It's sounding perfect now.
Okay, great. Thank you for alerting me. Yeah, so we have those two big things, the Diridon Station, this big, huge Google development that is 60 acres across downtown, and all that kind of going on, and then this larger area. And let's keep moving. There we go. So the downtown transportation plan worked with the public and community-based organizations, again, to really define what were the basic needs. And again, here equity came out on top, especially with the jobs growth and housing growth that we're going to see. We have thousands of units entitled and starting to go into construction, and millions of square feet of new office and workspace. And so making sure that folks can reach this from all over the region becomes a real equity issue in terms of economic access. Transition, right? We have this huge change happening to downtown San Jose, and how are we going to kind of deal with that, right? It's pretty big thing, a pretty big feat to really figure that out. And the last part is better public life and place. And one thing, if you've spent some time in downtown San Jose, portions of it are wonderful in terms of pedestrianization and feeling like you can hang out there. But there's also portions of it that are quite uninviting and have very fast cars moving through it, kind of classic old downtown issues. Or American downtown issues where we cut up downtown with highways and one-way roads with fast vehicles and stuff like that. And so we're really trying to make sure we're building in placemaking into our use of the roadway. So this is an awfully busy slide, but I brought it in to show this is the list of equity metrics that's been created through public conversation and interaction with the community-based organizations and through consultant work. And it's a very interesting one because it's looking at, in a sense, saying what are the benefits and kind of things that affect you negatively, like enforcement, parts of transportation, and then saying, let's make sure we measure them by race. And the topics themselves are a matter of general outcome, right? Where investment is going, where is it safe to travel? What's the burden of housing and transportation? All this stuff. And the approach here has been, let's measure this by race and see how it is affecting each group and making sure that we can kind of tease those things out and drive outcomes so that we're not just benefiting people who look like me. Now, one thing I'll throw out there is this sounds very nice, but what we're finding, and what probably a lot of you already know, is that when you try to get information by race from people, the people who are willing to put their racial information into surveys, for example, are people who look like me. People who don't look like me tend not to want to put their racial demographic information into recording systems, whether they be surveys or whatever instrument you're using. And you end up with this interesting skew where you get a good amount of responses in a survey. The latest survey we've done from downtown, I think we got about 700 responses or something like that. And the demographic split and we got about, I think 40–50% of respondents gave us their demographic information. That demographic information made it look like the community that cares about transportation in downtown is something like 60% white males over $200,000 income. And the other demographic groups either aren't showing up at all, or we're not being able to attract them into the conversation, or they're unwilling to share their demographics. And I think it's, of course, both. But one of the kind of problematizations that I want to throw out to everybody in that kind of process equity and metrics equity is a lot of times the things we want to measure, especially when we're dealing with something like equity, where the dynamic we're trying to trace has directly to do with power, and we're trying to use power of government and measurements to kind of get over it and try to heal the rift. A lot of the folks who we would imagine would want to put information in this and skew this don't have the view that us government folks or academics have on the usefulness of the information. And they are afraid to give the information or don't trust it. And this makes getting that process equity right very hard, and even the outcomes equity in this case. So that's my piece on the downtown plan. I'm going to jump into the access and mobility plan, which is our citywide transportation plan. This work is broken out into 4 different work streams. One, the outreach and engagement, of course, that kind of process equity piece. Then frameworks and strategies, and this is really where we're trying to figure out what are the big strategies across the city that really need to be taken on to help us move the needle mode shift wise and equity wise. So just to put a couple ideas in your head of what we're thinking is citywide bus lanes, acceleration of the bike plan implementation, tolling all non-residential roads, looking at those kinds of strategies. We're doing a bit of organizational development piece. I don't need to talk about that here. And then, of course, is this operationalization of all this work, and that's the decision support system. That, in effect, when we have our happy hours afterwards and get really excited about this, we call this our artificial intelligence planner, right? And it's trying to take in as much data and prioritization information as it can, and try to spit out what the next best project and what I really want is the next best basket of projects that we can do. So what does that decision support system look like? So I'm going to start off giving this, and then we're going to walk through a little bit of the project and then go back to the decision support system. So the decision support system is being built out of 3 modules. The first is the performance monitor, and this is really looking at how well projects are doing or areas are doing against the metrics that we're putting into the system. The second is the project database and analyzer. So the moment we've already built a project database of about 2,000 projects, and so that's all the different things that are proposed in different city documents and plans, development proposals, all of these things that are on the books. And obviously we can't take on 2,000 different changes to the roadway, and so we need to analyze them, and that analyzing them has to do with showing how they affect the metrics. To understand how they affect the metrics, we need the prediction module, and the prediction module is, of course, the technically most difficult piece of this. And actually, we've been very fortunate to work with Jane and thinking this through, and potentially link up some of the work that her group is doing into a future version of this. But understanding how a transportation project changes the transportation network and how that change in the transportation network affects metrics is the basic puzzle that piece is trying to solve. And of course, all of these things talk to each other, because as soon as the prediction module goes out, we should get updated performance monitoring and the like. All right, so what are the goals of the access and mobility plan? What are we building our metrics out of, right? Here are the goals that we've worked on, and their descriptions. I'll just highlight a few. Less driving is kind of one of the biggest pieces that we're trying to solve, right? Is how do you get a more environmentally sound transportation system? Well, we all know that reducing the automobile use without affecting travel ability and demand is a kind of order of the day. And then second is this access for all, right? And I will look a little bit at the metrics we're trying to use for that here in a second. But the access for all really looks at transportation, how folks can get to the opportunities in society, whether that be social, economic, educational, and the like. So taking those goals and did I duplicate my slide? Have more? Have more? Oh, yes. Okay, there we go. I duplicated the wrong slide there. Sorry. Here we go. So this is the equity lens and the KPIs. So before looking at the red lines, which I'm sure your eyes are being attracted to, you can see the list of KPIs we're using for each goal set. And we've specifically tried to pull out the most orthogonal KPIs to each other, so that we're really trying to pull out as much of a difference between less driving, say, and access for all, things like that, and make metrics or KPIs or key performance indicators, sorry, shouldn't use acronyms, to drive our work. And so here you can see we have the KPIs, and we have this overlay of really trying to understand where are we measuring equity specifically, right? And that's the kind of horizontal lines here, the equity focus pieces. Access for all obviously is the most direct, right? And this really has to do with how much of the income burden is put in transportation. You may know that in the South Bay, the percentage of income that folks are spending on housing plus transportation in general is about 55 to 60%. But as soon as you start getting into lower income groups, it can jump up to 70% of people's income is actually going to housing and transportation, right? And so reducing that burden has been one of the big metrics that we're looking at. Redundancy of options is really important. One of the things that we are seeing is that more affluent people are starting to move to places where you can get around by car, but you can get around by bike and you can get around by transit. And this affords stability, right? Your car breaks down, you can still get there by another mean, or and options, right? You can get around by transit, you can get around by bike, and this gives you a greater flexibility in how you want to live your life. And then we're just looking at the basic question of use of non-driving modes by area. I won't go through all of them, but you can see here we have these equity focus pieces that are really looking at equity directly. And then we have the overlay where we are doing something similar to what I was just kind of problematizing in the downtown plan, where we're looking at the demographic impacts and measurements across all of the different KPIs to make sure that we are not missing the pieces that are important to driving the resources in the right way. So what are the strategies that are going to be kind of put through this system? This is the result of a workshop with this one looks, I believe this is one of the public ones. And we did a whole bunch of workshops in Spanish and Vietnamese and English, and looking at, what are the different strategies the public wants, and we're going through the kind of now professionals and kind of trying to figure out what the strategies people are using to solve these kinds of problems across the world, and bring all these things together. And those strategies will then be kind of run through through those KPIs. And where does this kind of go, and what do strategies look like? I wanted to bring us back to the overall view of the city just before I end here and say, we're taking those strategies, and this was unfortunately not an equity-based one, but I thought it was a good visual to kind of bring us back to the larger perspective. We're going to take those KPIs. We're going to take the strategies we have and the projects that come out of those strategies, and then look across the city in all of these different measurements and start prioritizing the projects such that we move the needle on as many of the KPIs as we can. And here you can see an interesting one where this is actually our commute mode goals, where we really need to see change in single occupancy vehicle use, and where we don't think that there's going to be much change, or we don't even need any. And you can see that. And again, you can see that East San Jose area is the place where we actually need to see a great deal of change to meet this metric. But it's very interesting to think about some of those areas are just covered in cars. Folks need to access their jobs, and the transit system and the bike system are just not robust enough for people to live their lives on those systems. And so for us to start talking about meeting this goal, the commute mode split goals, we're going to be pushing on potentially actually harming equity issues, right? And that the economic access is really important, obviously, to bringing inequity under control. And so there's this kind of interesting, there's an interesting argument, one I don't like, but it's out there, right? Is, you know, maybe the most equitable thing to do in transportation is give everybody a car and maintain it for them so that they can get around. Of course, we don't want to go that way, but it is something that a map like this kind of shows you why an argument like that is out there. So bringing it back to the decision support system, right? We're going to be taking our understandings of equity through our different KPIs and taking immense amounts of data and bringing them back. This is this kind of an outline to the to the system. Bringing them through that analysis and really understanding where which projects will be the best ones for us, and then of course visualize or kind of inform city government, the public, leadership, and all of that on how we're going to go. So I hope this has been a quick kind of view into how cities address these kinds of issues and how we're thinking about them. And in particular, how they're coming into play with larger sets of work that are trying to guide resource allocation and government action. We are a pretty progressive shop in terms of trying to figure out how to do this, and it's great fun. If you ever want to join us, please reach out. We'd love to have you come play with our data and teach us what you can about how to do this better. And with that, I'll stop and take questions.
All right. Daniel, did you want to say your question, or should I read it for you?
Either way, Jane.
Go ahead.
Okay, Ram says thank you. Thank you very much for just a fabulous overview. And I guess the first thing I want to say is congratulations, because you have shown us a great amount of work here, and just both in terms of breadth and depth. My question is as follows. I was struck by the empirical difficulties and the challenges that you highlighted of embedding race into equity analysis. And at the same time, in your slide, you also showed that this was a community priority. It was this by race, this by race, that by race. So I'm wondering if you can speculate about ways in which we...
Hey, Daniel, I'm so sorry. My computer shut down right as you were starting the question, and I joined back on my phone.
Okay, sorry. I can repeat it. Yeah.
Again.
No, so anyway, I was congratulating you for the breadth and depth of the work that's being done. It's really stimulating and just terrific to see. And my question was that I was struck by the difficulties of embedding race into equity analysis. You described them well, and yet that's what the community really wanted. That the slide of the community was this by race, that by race, that by race. So I was wondering if you could speculate on ways in which both you, but us also kind of researchers, when we work with other cities, of ways to overcome that challenge and bring race to the forefront.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's all of us understand that inequity is along the lines of race in America and probably everywhere in the world. And measuring it then becomes so important to trying to figure out what you should actually do. But then again, because the power imbalance is based on race, the measurement itself becomes a difficult moment of power exchange, right? I think that it's about the power exchange and understanding how to address that we really need to talk about it, right? Because it's not about the survey instrument. It's not about the questions themselves. So of course it is to some degree, but at base, the way to solve it is to ensure that there is a grace and comfortability around race in the process. That, you know, I make sure that I don't do very many public presentations when we're really trying to deal with equity, because I'm a big white guy who grew up in Palo Alto. Not that people would know I grew up in Palo Alto, but just the representation of who is in the room and doing the work is really important. The education around being sensitive to and being able to talk about racial issues is really important in whoever's doing the work, and really needs to be presented, because a lot of times people don't interact with a person, they interact with some kind of digital instrument with your work. So trying to reflect that in that piece is even harder, right? Because it's you know, people project their basic power understandings of the world on what they see, and if there's no way to kind of crack that, it's really hard. So I think that it's a long process in terms of overall societal healing that brings it, right? And so I think that it's one of these things where the more conversant and comfortable people are with the topic, and the more that folks can show that in presenting the material, is one of the major things. The other thing is to make sure that it's clearly shown why demographic information, racial information is valuable. And this is very hard for sometimes, because for us, it's all easy. It's like, come on, we have to measure this, right? But people are, again, there's a power relationship there that's hard to overcome. So giving very clear descriptions of saying, we want to record demographic information because it will influence outcomes that will influence more resources going to your community, is incredibly important, right? And showing the value so that we can overcome the worries by showing the value of somebody, because we're not the ones putting ourselves on the line. We're not the ones putting the information out there that in the past has been a detriment to people's success, right? You have to give people a reason to overcome that.
Great. I have a question, Ramses. So equity and mobility often translates into accessibility, which you can kind of measure in terms of, you know, distance to transit stops and things like that. But it doesn't often take into account the context of individuals. For example, you may be close to transit, but it's an hour and 20-minute ride to get to a job. And so that's taking family time away from your lifestyle. So do you have any thoughts on how to integrate kind of the qualitative aspects of context of individuals and how you pull that into KPIs, for example?
Yeah, great question. You know, I'll start off by saying it's something we tried to already do a few years ago in the citywide climate plan. It's called the Climate Smart San Jose, and we really tried to wrap that plan in what we called the Good Life 2.0, right? Which acknowledged these problems as primary. That being stuck in your car isn't only a matter of emissions, but it's a matter of this lost family time. It's a matter of backaches and expressed anger, and you know, the middle finger being expressed in many ways. And so, how do you bring that into KPIs? So we did add for the Access and Mobility Plan one that was originally called Transportation Happiness, but people thought it was too cheeky, so I think we called it Transportation Experience or something like that. And there, what we want to do is ask people what it is in their individual lives that they really want us to pay attention to, right? And we're pretty sure travel time and the things like you're saying there
are important, right? And so the first answer always is, what's the question? And you got to make sure, again, that process equity cycle I was talking about is making sure that you're asking the right questions about what personal experience people actually care about. Super important. And then, our approach to it is to do more open-ended or kind of travel survey instruments at probably, at a smaller sample rate than we'd like, but okay, that's all right, to get out there, right? So again, what are the personal experiences people actually care about? Making sure we're defining that with the public, and then using our approach is going to be annual or biannual surveys to kind of look at those things from that perspective, and then probably cycle the questions, re-ask the question of are we asking the right question at that time? That a satisfactory answer?
Of course. I know you have a hard stop, so so everybody will have to hold your questions. And like to thank you very much, Ramses, for sharing your insights, and more importantly, for paving the way for building next generation livable cities. That is really important to be doing right now, and you're taking an aggressive approach to it, and I'm very excited by it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just again, thanks for the opportunity, and to all the folks out there. We are always looking for that many more great minds to help us think through these problems. So please, always reach out to me, but also think about joining the ranks of those of us who are trying to wrestle with these problems in local government. It's a hard job, like any job, but it's incredibly rewarding, and a work track you should all consider.
Agreed with that. So finally, a reminder for our upcoming seminar in the series, which will provide a view on these issues from startup company perspective, from a startup company called Paravision. That'll be on Friday, March 19th. AI ethics advisor Elizabeth M. Adams and CEO Doug Ailey will speak on race, equity, technology, and the city of Minneapolis, the future of face recognition, mitigating bias to get it right. So thanks all for coming today, and have a great weekend.